Lena had always loved quiet mornings. She liked the sound of birds outside her window, the smell of coffee filling her small kitchen, and the way sunlight touched the edge of her garden. After years of city noise and long workdays, she finally found a small neighborhood that promised peace. The houses were neat, the lawns trimmed, and everyone seemed polite enough. She thought it was the perfect place to start fresh. When she first moved in, she smiled at every neighbor she met. Some waved back, some just nodded, and a few kept their heads down, hurrying past. She didn't mind. She wasn't there to make friends right away. She only wanted a calm, simple life. She unpacked her boxes, planted a few flowers near her porch, and walked her golden retriever every evening. For her, this new beginning felt right. The neighborhood was run by a homeowners association, or HOA. It was supposed to keep everything nice and organized. Lena didn't know much about how it worked, but she didn't think much of it either. She paid her first monthly fee, read the short list of community rules, and followed them carefully. The man who led the HOA was named Mr. Daniels. He was tall, always dressed in a pressed shirt, and liked to remind everyone of the rules. Lena met him on her second week there. He knocked on her door with a clipboard in hand, introducing himself with a stiff smile. "Welcome to the community," he said. "We keep things very tidy around here." Lena thanked him and offered a kind smile. He looked around her porch for a long moment before leaving, reminding her to keep her garbage cans hidden from the street. She promised she would. At first, she thought he was just doing his job, but over the next few weeks, she noticed something strange. He seemed to always find something to complain about. One day, it was a small crack in her driveway. Another day, it was a few leaves that had blown onto her front yard before she had the chance to clean them. He started sending written notices, each one sounding more serious than the last. "Violation of yard maintenance policy," one letter said. "Failure to follow community decoration standards," another read, after she placed a small bird feeder near her garden. Lena didn't want trouble, so she fixed every small thing he mentioned. She swept, painted, and kept her yard spotless. But still, the letters came. Sometimes she wondered if he had something personal against her. The other neighbors seemed to know how he was. Some even warned her quietly. "He likes to pick on new people," an older man said one afternoon while watering his lawn. "Don't take it to heart. He's been that way for years." Lena smiled and thanked him for the advice, though deep down, she felt uneasy. She wasn't used to being treated unfairly, but she chose not to argue. She believed kindness and patience were stronger than anger. Every morning she continued her peaceful routine. She'd water her flowers, say hello to passers-by, and wave at kids heading to school. Her small garden began to bloom beautifully, filled with colors that made her house look warm and inviting. People started complimenting her yard. "It's so pretty," one woman said. "It makes the street feel alive." But not everyone felt the same. One morning, Lena returned from her walk to find another letter taped to her door. This one claimed her flowers were non-approved species that didn't match the neighborhood's design code. She read it twice, not sure whether to laugh or cry. It was just flowers, simple daisies and tulips. Still, she stayed polite. She called Mr. Daniels to ask about it, but he only spoke in a cold tone. "Rules are rules," he said. "You'll need to remove them by next week." Lena thanked him and hung up quietly. She didn't argue. But as she sat on her porch later that evening looking at her bright little garden, she felt a sadness she couldn't quite explain. Why did kindness always seem to bother some people? Days turned into weeks, and the tension continued. Mr. Daniels seemed to appear everywhere, checking lawns, measuring fences, and taking photos of people's houses. Once, Lena saw him standing across the street, staring at her home while pretending to be on his phone. It made her uncomfortable, but she ignored it. She reminded herself of her late father's advice. Never let anger guide your steps. Calmness is strength in disguise. She repeated those words often. What no one in the neighborhood knew was that Lena had spent most of her youth training in martial arts. She was a black belt in karate, a teacher for many years before her life took a quieter path. Her discipline had taught her patience, control, and balance, skills that shaped how she faced the world. To her, fighting wasn't about power, it was about peace. And peace was what she valued most, so she chose to stay silent. She let the HOA letters pile up in a drawer and tried to focus on her life. But a part of her began to wonder if she had made the right choice moving there. One Saturday morning, she joined a neighborhood cleanup event. She thought it might help her connect with people and ease the tension. Some neighbors were friendly, offering coffee and smiles. But when Mr. Daniels arrived, the mood changed. He walked around, pointing at small things that needed fixing, talking loudly about standards. When he reached Lena's area, he frowned. "Still haven't replaced that garden ornament," he muttered. She hadn't realized it wasn't allowed. It was just a small wind chime shaped like a butterfly, something her mother had given her years ago. Lena smiled gently. "It's just a small decoration," she said softly. He shook his head. "Rules are rules," he said again before walking away. That night, she sat by her window, watching the lights flicker across the street. The neighborhood looked peaceful, yet something about it didn't feel right anymore. She thought about how some people mistake kindness for weakness. She wondered why power made some people forget compassion. Still, she refused to let it change who she was. She decided she would continue being polite, no matter how unfair things seemed. She would keep her calm, her quiet smile, and her peace. What she didn't know was that her patience would soon be tested in a way she never expected. The small issues, the rude comments, the unwanted attention, they were only the beginning. A day was coming when Mr. Daniels would cross a line he couldn't come back from, and when that moment came, the whole neighborhood would see a side of Lena no one knew existed, not an angry woman, not a fighter, but someone who could stand her ground with quiet, unshakable strength. For now, though, she closed her curtains, took a deep breath, and whispered to herself, "Peace isn't the absence of problems. It's the strength to stay calm through them." Then she smiled, turned off the light, and let the soft hum of the night remind her that tomorrow was another chance to begin again. A few weeks passed, and the weather began to warm up. Birds built their nests in the tall trees around the neighborhood, and the streets looked bright with sunlight. But for Lena, peace still seemed just out of reach. Every few days, she would find another letter in her mailbox from the HOA. Each one carried the same sharp tone, rules, warnings, and reminders. It didn't matter how clean her lawn looked or how carefully she followed the guidelines. Somehow, Mr. Daniels always found something new to criticize. One morning she found a note complaining that her dog leash was too long for community standards. Another time he said her recycling bins were slightly visible from the street. Lena sighed but stayed calm. She didn't want to make a scene. She believed that patience would win in the end. But things slowly started to feel different. When she walked her dog, she noticed how Mr. Daniels would glance her way with a cold look. He often stood near the corner of the street with his clipboard, pretending to write notes while watching her house. At first, Lena thought maybe she was imagining it. But then, other neighbors started to notice too. One afternoon, an older woman named Mrs. Grant stopped by while Lena was trimming her hedges. "Don't let him get under your skin," the woman said quietly. "He's been like this for years. Last year he fined a family because their mailbox was the wrong shade of brown." Lena gave a soft smile. "I'll be fine," she said. "I'm just trying to keep things peaceful." Mrs. Grant nodded. "Peaceful is good, but don't let people mistake your kindness for weakness, dear." Those words stayed with Lena. She didn't like conflict, but she also knew when someone was crossing a line. A few days later, she attended her first HOA meeting, hoping to understand what was going on. The meeting was held in the community center, a small room with rows of chairs and a long table at the front. Mr. Daniels stood behind it, speaking to the group like a strict teacher. When Lena walked in, several people smiled at her politely. Others avoided eye contact. It was clear that most residents were uncomfortable speaking up. The meeting began, with the usual announcements, yard rules, parking reminders, maintenance schedules. But then, out of nowhere, Mr. Daniels looked directly at her. "I'd like to address an ongoing issue regarding one of our newer residents," he said. "We've had several minor violations on record: improper decorations, visible trash bins, and unapproved garden features." Everyone turned to look at Lena. She felt her face warm, but she stayed quiet. He continued, "We appreciate your cooperation, but we expect full compliance. This community has standards, and it's important everyone follows them." His tone wasn't just strict, it was humiliating. He didn't need to name her. Everyone already knew who he meant. Lena took a deep breath. "I've been following the guidelines," she said softly. "If something isn't clear, I'd be happy to talk after the meeting." Her calm tone seemed to bother him even more. "We've already discussed this through letters," he said sharply. "Let's move on." The rest of the meeting dragged on, but Lena barely heard any of it. She wasn't angry, just disappointed. She had never expected to be singled out in a place that was supposed to feel like home. After the meeting, a few neighbors came up to her quietly. One man said, "Don't take it personally. He does this to everyone." Another woman added, "He just likes control. The calmer you stay, the more it irritates him." Lena smiled politely and thanked them, though inside she felt something shift. It wasn't fear, it was awareness. She realized Mr. Daniels didn't dislike her because of anything she did. He disliked her because he couldn't control her peace. Over the next few weeks, the harassment became more obvious. He started sending inspection notices even when nothing was wrong. Once he showed up outside her house claiming he needed to check the fence height. Another time he accused her of leaving her lights on too late at night, calling it a nuisance to the neighborhood. Lena handled it all with calm replies. She documented everything, saving every letter and email. She knew patience was her strength, but now she also understood the importance of being prepared. One evening she was watering her plants when two young neighbors, a couple from down the street, stopped by. They looked hesitant at first, but then spoke up. "We saw what happened at the meeting," the woman said. "He shouldn't have spoken to you that way." Lena smiled kindly. "It's all right. He's just doing what he thinks is right." The man shook his head. "No, he's a bully. He used to pick on us too. We finally stopped going to meetings because of him." Their honesty touched her. It made her realize that many people were quietly dealing with the same thing. They weren't silent because they agreed with him. They were silent because they were tired. That night, Lena sat on her porch with a notebook. She wrote down every incident since she'd moved in. Each note, each encounter, each rule he twisted against her. Not out of anger, but to stay grounded in truth. She thought about her years of training, how her instructor had once told her, "Real strength isn't in striking back. It's in knowing when not to." She believed that more than ever. But she also knew that sometimes silence can be mistaken for fear. One afternoon, as she returned from the grocery store, she saw Mr. Daniels standing at the end of her driveway. He was taking photos of her house again. Lena parked her car calmly and walked over. "Is there something wrong?" she asked gently. He looked up, surprised. "Just making sure you're following the guidelines," he said. "You've had a few ongoing issues," she smiled politely. "I appreciate your concern. But if you have any complaints, please send them in writing." Her calm voice seemed to unsettle him. He stared at her for a moment before walking away without another word. When he left, Lena let out a slow breath. She wasn't scared anymore. She knew something he didn't, that peace wasn't weakness. It was quiet confidence, but deep down she also sensed something else. This wasn't the end. He wasn't done trying to push her. People like him never stopped until they were forced to see their own reflection, and that day was coming soon. For now, Lena went back inside, fed her dog, and made herself tea. She looked out at her garden, still full of life and color, and smiled softly. No matter how many letters came or how many cold stares she faced, she wouldn't change who she was. Because peace wasn't just what she wanted, it was who she was. And when the moment came that her calm was tested beyond limits, she was ready. Not to fight in anger, but to stand strong in truth. Spring was supposed to bring calmness, but for Lena it only brought more tension. The flowers in her garden had started to bloom, filling the air with color and scent, yet she could never fully enjoy it. Every time she stepped outside, she felt the same uneasy presence watching her. Mr. Daniels hadn't stopped his constant inspections. If anything, he seemed to be getting bolder. He'd walk by her house slowly, pretending to check his phone, or stop in front of her gate just to stare for a few seconds too long. Each week, another notice appeared in her mailbox, some for things that didn't even make sense. One morning, she received a warning saying her wind chime was too reflective and could distract passing drivers. It made her sigh. It wasn't even near the road. It hung quietly by her porch, barely moving in the wind. She decided not to react. Instead, she went about her day, baking cookies for the older lady next door and taking her dog for a walk. People greeted her warmly, and that gave her comfort. It reminded her that not everyone in the neighborhood was difficult, but there was something different in the air that week, like a storm that hadn't started yet, but was coming soon. The following Saturday, the community had another HOA meeting, this time outdoors near the park. Lena didn't plan to attend, but when Mrs. Grant knocked on her door that morning and asked if she'd come along, she agreed. She wanted to show she wasn't hiding from anyone. The park was filled with folding chairs and chatter. Children played on the swings and adults gathered in small circles. Mr. Daniels stood near the front, wearing his usual pressed shirt and holding his clipboard like always. His tone was sharp as he spoke about upholding neighborhood pride. When he spotted Lena in the crowd, his expression tightened. It was as if her calm presence bothered him more than anything else. The meeting went on normally until he suddenly turned toward her direction. "There's been a growing problem with non-approved property decorations," he said loudly, scanning the group before fixing his eyes on her. "Some people seem to think the rules don't apply to them." Murmurs moved through the crowd. Lena could feel eyes turning toward her. He continued. "For example, a certain resident continues to display unapproved ornaments despite several notices. We have to be consistent or this community loses its order." Lena stood up slowly. Her voice was calm but steady. "If you're referring to me," she said, "I've done everything asked of me. The ornament you mentioned is a gift from my mother. It doesn't harm anyone." Mr. Daniels smirked slightly. "Rules are rules. Sentimental value doesn't excuse violations." The tone in his voice was sharp, almost mocking. People shifted uncomfortably in their seats. Mrs. Grant spoke up quietly. "Come on, it's just a small decoration. Surely that's not worth all this." He ignored her. "Some people think politeness can cover up disobedience," he said, still staring at Lena. Lena took a deep breath. "I'm not trying to break any rule," she said softly. "I just want to live peacefully like everyone else." Her calmness only seemed to fuel his frustration. He raised his voice. "Peaceful doesn't mean ignoring the rules. You've had multiple reminders. If you can't follow basic community standards, maybe this neighborhood isn't right for you." The words hung heavy in the air. A few people gasped quietly. It was cruel, unnecessary. Lena didn't react. She didn't shout or argue. She simply looked at him, her eyes steady and calm. "You have no right to speak to me that way," she said gently but firmly. The crowd went silent. For a moment, even Mr. Daniels didn't know what to say. Then with a dismissive wave, he said, "We'll deal with this later." The meeting ended awkwardly. People left in small groups whispering. Some looked at Lena with sympathy, others with discomfort. But no one could deny that Mr. Daniels had gone too far. That evening, Lena sat on her porch, sipping tea as the sun went down. She felt tired, not from fear, but from disappointment. She had tried so hard to stay patient, to avoid conflict, and yet kindness always seemed to invite cruelty from the wrong kind of people. Just as she was about to head inside, she saw him again. Mr. Daniels was walking up her driveway, clipboard in hand. Her dog barked softly beside her. She stood up. "Is there something you need?" she asked calmly. He stopped at the edge of her porch. "You still haven't removed that ornament," he said coldly. "I'm documenting it one last time before issuing a fine." Lena sighed quietly. "You've made your point," she said. "You've sent enough letters." He stepped closer, voice rising. "This is how things fall apart, when people like you think they're above the rules." Her dog growled softly, sensing the tension. Lena's eyes stayed steady. "Please step back," she said, her tone still polite but firmer now. He ignored her, taking one more step forward. "If you can't follow simple instructions," before he could finish, his hand reached out toward the small butterfly ornament hanging near her porch rail, as if to snatch it off. Lena moved instantly, not violently, just with quiet control. She stepped between him and the ornament, her hand gently stopping his wrist midair. It wasn't rough, but it was firm enough to make him freeze. Her movements were smooth, practiced, and calm. The people walking nearby stopped to watch. No one spoke. "Please don't touch what isn't yours," she said softly, her voice steady as stone. For a moment, his expression shifted from anger to shock. He tried to pull his hand back, but her calm grip redirected it slightly, forcing him to step back. She didn't hurt him, she didn't need to. The message was clear. He stumbled slightly, his clipboard nearly falling from his hand. The crowd that had gathered nearby whispered quietly, unsure what they had just seen. Lena lowered her hand and looked at him, her face still calm. "I've asked you kindly. Please stop coming onto my property." For once, Mr. Daniels had no words. He stood there breathing heavily, his pride more bruised than anything else. Then, without saying another word, he turned. Lena took a slow breath and turned back toward her porch. She picked up her tea again, her hand steady. The neighbors who had seen the moment began to murmur, some smiling quietly, others shaking their heads in disbelief. Mrs. Grant called out softly from across the street, "Are you all right, dear?" Lena smiled gently. "I'm fine," she said. "Just fine." Inside, she felt no anger, no guilt, only peace. She hadn't hurt anyone. She had simply stood her ground with the same control and balance she'd practiced all her life. As the evening grew quiet again, the neighborhood lights flickered on one by one. The wind chime by her porch rang softly, its gentle sound breaking the silence. For the first time in weeks, Lena smiled, a small, quiet smile of relief. Not because she had won anything, but because she had finally shown that calmness wasn't weakness. And though she didn't know it yet, that single moment would change everything. By the next morning, the whole neighborhood would be talking. But for now, she sat peacefully under the fading sky, the air warm and still, feeling the quiet power of self-control. The next morning, the entire neighborhood felt different. The air was still, but something had shifted. It didn't take long for word to spread about what had happened the evening before. Neighbors whispered in driveways, shared glances from their porches, and exchanged quiet conversations while walking their dogs. A few people had been outside when it happened, and others had seen it through their windows. One teenager even recorded a short video from across the street. By sunrise, nearly everyone had seen it. For the first time, people weren't afraid to talk about Mr. Daniels. Some laughed in disbelief, others shook their heads, but most felt something they hadn't in a long time: relief. Relief that someone had finally stood up to the man who had made their peaceful community feel like a place of rules instead of home. Lena, however, didn't know any of this. She spent her morning as usual, watering her plants, feeding her dog, and brewing coffee. She didn't check her phone or step out much. She wasn't proud of what had happened, but she wasn't ashamed either. She had simply defended her space, nothing more. It was around mid-morning when Mrs. Grant came over holding a small plate of muffins. "You've caused quite the stir, dear," she said with a half-smile. Lena looked puzzled. "What do you mean?" "Oh, you haven't heard," Mrs. Grant said, sitting on the porch chair. "Half the neighborhood's talking about last night. Someone filmed it. People can't stop watching." Lena's eyes widened slightly. "Filmed it?" she asked softly. Mrs. Grant nodded. "Don't worry, it's nothing bad. You were calm, graceful even. People are saying they've never seen Mr. Daniels back down before. You did it without shouting or fighting. It was dignified," Lena sighed gently. She hadn't wanted attention. All she'd wanted was peace. "I didn't mean to cause trouble," she said quietly. "You didn't," Mrs. Grant said kindly. "You just showed people that he's not untouchable." As the day went on, Lena noticed more people greeting her than usual. Some waved from across the street, others stopped by to chat. A few even thanked her quietly for what she had done. By afternoon, even those who had once stayed silent were beginning to speak out. Stories started surfacing. People who had been unfairly fined, embarrassed in meetings, or sent harsh letters for small things. Mr. Daniels had made them all feel small, and now they finally had the courage to say so. The HOA board, which had mostly followed his lead for years, began to feel pressure. They couldn't ignore how many residents were complaining. A special meeting was scheduled for that weekend to address the growing unrest. Lena hadn't planned on attending. She didn't want to be the center of anything. But that changed when a group of neighbors came to her door one evening. They stood on her porch, a mix of young families and older residents, all with the same look in their eyes: hope. "We're going to that meeting," one of them said. "And we'd like you to come too." "People listen to you now," You speak with respect. That's what this place needs, Lena hesitated. I'm not sure that's a good idea, she said softly. I don't want to make enemies. You won't, another neighbor said. You've already made a difference. You just need to finish what you started. She thought for a moment, then smiled faintly. All right, she said. I'll go. When the day of the meeting arrived, the community center was packed, more than she had ever seen before. The air was filled with quiet tension. Some people looked nervous. Others looked determined. Mr. Daniels stood at the front, his usual clipboard in hand, but this time he looked less confident. The whispers in the room made it clear. His control was slipping. The meeting started, and as usual, he tried to lead. Let's keep things civil, he said, his voice tight. There have been some misunderstandings recently, but he didn't get far. A man from the second row stood up. Misunderstandings? You've been bullying people for years, Daniels. You fine us for nonsense and embarrass people in public. That's not leadership. Murmurs of agreement rippled through the room. Someone else added, You humiliated that lady over a decoration, and when she stood her ground, you tried to twist it. We're tired of this. Lena sat quietly near the back, listening. She hadn't planned to speak, but when the room began to fall silent again, people turned toward her. She stood up slowly. Her voice was calm, gentle, but it carried through the room. I didn't come here to argue, she said. I moved to this neighborhood because it looked peaceful. I thought it would be a place where people cared for each other. Everyone listened closely. I followed every rule, she continued. Not because I had to, but because I respect the community. But what I learned is that rules mean nothing if there's no respect behind them. Kindness is what keeps a neighborhood strong, not control. Her words were simple, but they hit deep. The room was completely silent now. Even Mr. Daniels didn't interrupt. I don't want revenge, Lena said softly. I just want this to be a place where people feel welcome, where no one's afraid to plant a flower, hang a small decoration, or simply be themselves. A few people started to clap, quietly at first, then louder. Soon almost everyone joined in. It wasn't the loud, angry kind of applause, it was warm, grateful. Mr. Daniels shifted uncomfortably. His face was pale and his hands trembled slightly as he adjusted his clipboard. One of the board members finally stood and said, We've had several complaints and concerns. It's clear we need new leadership. Effective immediately, we'll be voting to remove Mr. Daniels from his position. A cheer broke out from the crowd. Mr. Daniels tried to speak, but his voice was drowned out by the sound of relief filling the room. When it was over, people gathered around Lena, thanking her. Some even hugged her. For the first time in a long while, the atmosphere felt light. People smiled, laughed, and talked about making positive changes, cleanup drives, small events, and ways to bring the community together. Lena felt a quiet happiness in her heart. She hadn't planned to change anything. She just wanted peace. But sometimes standing for what's right brings peace not only to yourself, but to others too. As the crowd began to leave, Mrs. Grant walked over and took Lena's hand. You see, she said softly, you didn't fight with anger. You led with grace. That's real strength, Lena smiled. I just wanted people to feel safe again, she said. Outside, the evening sky was painted with orange and pink, the air cool and gentle. The neighborhood, once tense and divided, now felt alive again. People waved to each other as they walked home, their steps lighter, their faces brighter. And for Lena, as she walked back to her house, the small wind chime by her porch rang softly in the breeze. It was still there, untouched, beautiful, and free. She looked at it for a long moment, then smiled to herself. It wasn't just a decoration anymore. It was a quiet reminder that sometimes calm courage can do what force never could. The weeks after the HOA meeting passed quietly, but for the first time in years, the neighborhood felt alive in a way it hadn't before. People smiled at each other on the streets. Children played freely in the yards. Even the air seemed lighter, filled with the sound of laughter and greetings instead of tension. Lena's house became a quiet center of warmth. Her small garden was now admired by almost everyone who walked by. Flowers of all colors swayed gently in the breeze, and the little wind chime that had caused so much trouble rang softly, a subtle reminder of the calm courage that had changed the neighborhood. Mr. Daniels had quietly resigned from his position, leaving the HOA to elect a new board. People didn't celebrate him leaving, but there was relief. The community finally felt like it could breathe again. Neighbors began to speak to Lena more often. They asked for advice about gardening, shared small stories about their families, and even invited her to join local events. She still stayed polite and calm, never seeking the spotlight, but she started to feel the sense of belonging she had hoped for when she first moved in. One day, a group of parents approached her while she was walking her dog. "Would you consider helping us organize a self-defense class?" one of them asked. "Some of us have been worried after everything that's happened. We'd feel safer learning a few simple techniques." Lena paused, surprised. She had spent years training in martial arts, but she had left that life behind. Still, she realized that sharing what she knew could make a difference. She nodded slowly. "I can do that," she said. "It's not about fighting. It's about confidence and awareness." The following weekend, she set up a small class at the community center. A handful of children, teenagers, and parents showed up, curious but nervous. Lena began with simple lessons: how to stand confidently, how to react calmly in tense situations, and how to be aware of surroundings. She emphasized patience and self-control over strength, teaching that courage often comes from staying calm under pressure. By the end of the session, everyone was smiling. Children practiced simple moves, parents felt more confident, and Lena realized something important. She wasn't just teaching martial arts, she was helping people reclaim their sense of safety and trust. Word spread quickly. More residents wanted to join her classes. She began hosting them weekly, not as a teacher seeking recognition, but as a neighbor offering support. Soon, the community center was filled with laughter, concentration, and encouragement. People who had been shy or withdrawn were now engaging with their neighbors, feeling stronger and more connected than before. At the same time, the new HOA board worked to repair the relationships that had been strained by Mr. Daniels' behavior. Policies were reviewed, rules were clarified, and meetings became collaborative instead of intimidating. Residents were encouraged to voice concerns and share ideas. Decisions were made transparently, and Lena quietly supported the process by attending meetings and offering suggestions when asked. One sunny afternoon, a small block party was organized. Tables of food lined the streets, children ran games, and music played softly in the background. Lena watched from her porch, smiling as neighbors laughed together. The woman who had once felt isolated and bullied was now part of a thriving, welcoming community. Mrs. Grant came over and stood beside her. "Look at this," she said, her eyes bright. "People are finally connecting. You helped make that happen, you know." Lena shook her head gently. "I didn't do anything alone," she said. "They just needed a little courage, and maybe someone to show them it was okay to stand up for themselves." The wind chime above her porch rang softly in the warm breeze. Lena reached out and touched it, remembering the night she had calmly stopped Mr. Daniels from taking it. That single act had changed so much, not because of force, but because of calmness and confidence. As the sun began to set, she walked through the neighborhood with her dog. People waved, greeted her, and even stopped to chat. The children who had been in her self-defense class ran past, laughing and pretending to practice the moves she had taught them. She felt a quiet pride, not the kind that comes from showing power, but the kind that comes from helping others feel safe, respected, and connected. Her life had shifted from seeking only her own peace to creating a community that shared it. Even the small things felt meaningful now. A neighbor leaving flowers on her doorstep, another sharing a baked pie, a family inviting her to dinner. These gestures of kindness reminded her that patience, empathy, and quiet strength could transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone around her. A few weeks later, the new HOA board officially recognized her contributions. They thanked her for her guidance, her calm demeanor, and her willingness to help rebuild trust in the neighborhood. Lena accepted their thanks quietly, redirecting attention to the community instead of herself. She thought often about the journey, from the first letter that criticized her flowers, to the confrontation on the porch, to the moment the neighborhood finally began to listen. It had not been easy, but it had taught her that courage could be quiet and that patience could be powerful. In the evenings, she often sat by her porch sipping tea and watching the neighborhood settle into a gentle calm. Her dog lay at her feet. The wind chime sang softly above her, and the streets were filled with laughter, soft conversations, and the sound of life. Lena realized that real change didn't require anger or confrontation. It required steady calm, clarity, and the willingness to stand for what was right without losing oneself in the process. She had always known this, but now she had seen it work in the world around her. The community had become more than a place to live. It had become a place to belong. And in that belonging, Lena found something she had long searched for: true peace. Even Mr. Daniel's absence felt like a lesson to everyone. The man who once tried to control and intimidate had inadvertently reminded the neighborhood how valuable respect, kindness, and quiet courage really are. Lena smiled to herself, her heart light. She didn't need accolades or recognition. She had helped create something that mattered more than any victory. She had helped a neighborhood heal and find its own strength. As night fell, the streetlights flickered on, casting warm glows on the rows of houses. Children waved goodbye after playing outside. Neighbors greeted each other one last time, and the wind chime above Lena's porch rang gently in the evening air. She leaned back in her chair, a sense of fulfillment washing over her. Life was simple, yes, but also meaningful. She had found peace, and in doing so, she had given peace to others. And for Lena, that was enough. The neighborhood had finally become the home she had dreamed of, a place of calm, kindness, and quiet courage that would carry on for years to come.